Ah, if I had not that hope, I would not have come to fetch you. And how can one enter the house on the lake without crossing the lake? From the third cellar, from which we were so unluckily driven away. We will go back there now. I will tell you, said the Persian, with a sudden change in his voice. I will tell you the exact place, sir. It is between a set piece and a discarded scene from Roy de Lahore, exactly at the spot where Joseph Buick died. Come, sir, take courage. Follow me. And hold your hand at the level of your eyes. But where are we? The Persian lit his lamp again and flung its rays down two enormous corridors that crossed each other at right angles. It must be, he said, in the part used more peculiarly for the waterworks. I see no fire coming from the furnaces. He went in front of Frau, seeking his road, stopping abruptly when he was afraid of meeting some waterman. Then they had to protect themselves against the glow of a sort of underground forge, which the men were extinguishing, and at which Raoul recognized the demons whom Christine had seen at the first time of her first captivity. In this way, they gradually arrived beneath the huge cellars below the stage. They must at this time have been at the very bottom of the tub, and at an extremely great depth. When we remember that the earth was dug out at 50 feet below the water that lay under the whole of that part of Paris, all the water had to be exhausted in the building of the opera house. To give an idea of the amount of water that was pumped, I can tell the reader that it represented the area of the courtyard of the Louvre and a height half as deep again as the towers of Notre Dame. And nevertheless the engineers had to leave a lake. The Persian touched a partition wall and said, if I am not mistaken, this is a wall that might easily belong to the house on the lake. He was striking a partition wall of the tub, and perhaps it would be as well for the reader to know how the bottom of the partition walls of the tub were built, in order to prevent the water surrounding the building operations of remaining in immediate contact with the walls supporting the whole of the theatrical machinery. The architect was obliged to build a double case in every direction. The work of the constructing this double case took a whole year. It was the wall of the first inner case that the Persian struck when speaking to Raoul of the house on the lake. To anyone understanding the architecture of the edifice, the Persian's actions would seem to indicate that Eric's mysterious house had been built in a double case, formed of a thick wall constructed as an embankment or dam, then of a brick wall, a tremendous layer of cement, and another wall several yards in thickness. At the Persian's words, Ralph flung himself against the wall and listened earnestly, but he heard nothing, except distant steps sounding on the floor of the upper portions of the theater. The Persian darkened his lantern again. "Look out!" he said. "Keep your hand up and silence, for we shall try another way of getting in." And he led him to the little staircase by which they had come down lately. They went up, stopping at each step, peering into the darkness and the silence, till they came to the third cellar. Here the Persian motioned to Raoul to go on his knees, and in this way, crawling on both knees and one hand, for the other hand was held in the position indicated, they reached the end wall. Against this wall stood a large discarded scene from the Roi de Lahore. Close to the scene was a set piece. Between the scene and the set piece there was just room for a body which one day was found hanging there, the body of Joseph Buquet. The Persian, still kneeling, stopped and listened for a moment. He seemed to hesitate and looked at Raoul. Then he turned his eyes upward toward the second cellar, which sent down the faint glimmer of a lantern through the cranny between two boards. This glimmer seemed to trouble the Persian. At last he tossed his head and made up his mind to act. He slipped between the set piece and the scenes from Roi de Lahore. With Raoul close upon his heels, with his free hand, the Persian felt the wall. Raoul saw him bear heavily upon the wall, just as he had pressed against the wall in Christine's dressing room. Then the stone gave way, leaving a hole in the wall. This time the Persian took his pistol from his pocket and made a sign to Raoul to do as he did. He cocked the pistol, and resolutely, still on his knees, he wiggled through the hole in the wall. Raoul, who had wished to pass first, had to be content to follow him. The hole was very narrow. The Persian stopped almost at once. Raoul heard him feeling the stones around him. Then the Persian took out his dark lantern again, stooped forward, examined something beneath him, and immediately extinguished his lantern. Raoul heard him say in a whisper, "We shall have 2 drops, a few yards. Without making noise, take off your boots." The Persian handed his own shoes to Raoul. Put them outside the wall," he said. "We shall find them there when we leave." He crawled a little farther on his knees, then turned right around and said, "These 2 pairs of boots, which were placed, according to the Persian's papers, just between the set piece and the scene from Roi de Lahore, on the post where Joseph Buquet was found hanging, were never discovered. They must have been taken by some stage carpenter or door shutter." Well, so much for that. I am going to hang my hands from the edge of the stone and let myself drop into his house. You must do exactly the same. Do not be afraid. I will catch you in my arms." Raoul soon heard a dull sound, evidently produced by the fall of the Persian, and then dropped down. Excuse me. He felt himself clasped in the Persian's arm. "Hush!" said the Persian. Excuse me. And they stood motionless, listening. The darkness was as thick around them. The silence heavy and terrible. Then the Persian began to make play with the dark lantern again, turning the rays over their heads, looking for the hole through which they had come, and failing to find it. "Oh," he said, "the stone was closed of itself." And the light of the lantern swept down the wall and over the floor. The Persian stooped and picked up something of a sort of cord, and he exclaimed for a second and flung away with horror. "The Punjab lasso!" he muttered. "What is it?" asked Raoul. The Persian shivered. "It might very well be the rope by which the man was hanged, and which was looked for so long ago." And suddenly, seized with fresh anxiety, he moved the little red disc of his lantern over the walls. In this way he lit up a curious thing, the trunk of a tree, which seemed still quite alive, and its leaves and the branches of the tree ran right up the walls and disappeared in the ceiling. Because of the smallness of the luminous disc, it was difficult at first to make out the appearance of things. They saw the corner of a branch, and a leaf, and another leaf, and next to it nothing at all, nothing but a ray of light that seemed to reflect itself. Raoul passed his hand over that nothing, over that reflection. "Hello," he said. "The wall is a looking glass." "Yes, a looking glass," said the Persian in a tone of deep emotion. And passing the hand that held the pistol over his moist forehead, he added, "We have dropped into the torture chamber." What the Persian knew of this torture chamber, and what there befell him and his companion, shall be told in his own words, as set down in a manuscript which he left behind him, and which I copy verbatim. Chapter 21. Interesting and instructive vicissitudes of a Persian in the cellars of the opera. The Persian's narrative. It was the first time that I entered the house on the lake. I had often begged the trapdoor lover, as we used to call Eric in my country, to open its mysterious doors to me. He always refused. I made very many attempts, but in vain. To obtain admittance, watch him as I might, after I first learned that he had taken up his apartment abode at the opera, the darkness was always too thick to enable me to see how he worked the door in the wall on the lake. One day, when I thought myself alone, I stepped on into the boat and rowed toward the part of the wall through which I had seen Eric disappear. It was then that I came to contact with the siren who guarded the approach and whose charm was very nearly fatal to me. I had no sooner put off from the bank than the silence amid which I floated on the water was disturbed by a sort of whispering singing that hovered all around me. It was half breath, half music. It rose softly from the waters of the lake, and I was surrounded by it though I knew not what artifice. It followed me, moved with me, and was so soft that it did not alarm me. On the contrary, it was my longing to approach the source of that sweet and enticing harmony. I leaned out of my little boat over the water, for there was no doubt in my mind that the singing came from the water itself. By this time I was alone in the boat in the middle of the lake. The voice, for it was now distinctly a voice, was beside me on the water. I leaned still farther. The lake was perfectly calm, and a moonbeam that passed through the air hole in the rune scribe showed me absolutely nothing on its surface, which was smooth and black as ink. It took my ears to get rid of a possible humming, but I soon had to accept the fact that there was no humming in my ears so harmonious as the singing whisper that followed and now attracted me. Had I been inclined to superstition, I should have certainly thought that I had to do with some siren whose business it was to confound the traveler who should venture from a country where we are too fond of fantastic things to know them through and through, and I had no doubt but that I was face to face with some new invention of Eric's. But this invention was too perfect that I leaned out of the boat. I was impelled less by desire to discover its trick than to enjoy its charm. I leaned out until I almost overturned the boat. Suddenly 2 monstrous arms issued from the bosom of the waters and seized me by the neck, dragging me down into the depths with irresistible force. I should certainly have been lost if I had not had time to give a cry by which Eric knew me. For it was he, and instead of drowning me, as was certainly his first intention, he swam with me and laid me gently on the bank. "How improved you are," he said, as he stood before me dripping with water. Why try to enter my house? I never invited you. I don't want you there, nor anybody. Did you save my life only to make it unbearable to me? However great the service you rendered him, however great a service you have rendered him, Eric may end by forgetting it. And you know that nothing can restrain Eric, not even Eric himself. Oh wait, that's right. He talks in the third person. However great the service you rendered him, Eric may end by forgetting it. And you may know that nothing can restrain Eric, not even Eric himself. He spoke, but I had now no other wish than to know what I already called the trick of the siren. He satisfied my curiosity. For Eric, who is a real monster, I have seen him at work in Persia. Alas, he is also, in certain respects, a regular child, vain and self-conceited, and there is nothing he loves so much, after astonishing people, as to prove all that really miraculously ingenuity of his mind. He laughed and showed me his long reed. "It's the silliest trick you ever saw," he said, "but it's very useful for breathing and singing in the water. I learned it from the Tonkin pirates, who are able to remain hidden for hours in the beds of the river." I spoke to him severely. "It's a trick that nearly killed me," I said, "and it may have been fatal to others. You know that. You know what you promised me, Eric. No more murders." "Have I really committed murders?" he asked, putting on his most admirable air. "Wretched man!" I cried. "Have you forgotten the rosy hours of Mazandaran?" Yes, he replied in a sadder tone. "I prefer to forget them. I used to make the little Sultan laugh, though. All that belongs to the past," I declared. "But there is the present, and you are responsible to me for the present, because if I had wished, there would have been none at all for you. Remember that, Eric. I saved your life." And I took advantage of that turn in the conversation to speak to him of something that had long been on my mind. "Eric," I asked. "Eric, swear that—" "What?" he retorted. "You know I never keep my oaths. Oaths are made to catch gulls with. Tell me. You can tell me at any rate." Well, the chandelier. The chandelier, Eric." "What about the chandelier?" "You know what I mean." "Oh," he snickered. "I don't mind telling you about the chandelier. It wasn't I. The chandelier was very old and worn." Then Eric laughed. He was more terrible than ever. He jumped into a boat, chuckling so horribly that I could not help trembling. "Very old and worn? By dear Dorga." Dorga is a Persian for chief of police. Oh, thank you. Very old and worn. The chandelier. It fell of itself. It came down with a smash. And now, Dagana, take my advice and go and dry yourself off, or you'll catch cold in the head. And never get... And never... And never get into my boat again. And whatever you do, don't try to enter my house. I'm not always there, Dagana. and I should be so sorry to have to dedicate my requiem mass to you." So saying, swifting to and fro like a monkey, and still chuckling, he pushed off and soon disappeared in the darkness of the lake. From that day, I gave up all thoughts of penetrating into his house by the lake. That entrance was obviously too well guarded, especially since he had learned that I knew about it. But I felt that there must be another entrance, for I had often seen Eric disappear in the third cellar when I was watching him, though I could not imagine how. Ever since I had discovered Eric installed in the opera, I lived in a perpetual terror of his horrible fancies. Not in so far as I was concerned, but I dreaded everything for others. The Persian might easily have admitted that Eric's fate so interested himself, for he was well aware that the government of Tehran had learned that Eric was still alive. It would have been all up to the modest pension of the erstwhile Dagara. It is only fair, however, to add that the Persian had a noble and generous heart, and I do not doubt for a moment that the catastrophes which he feared for others greatly accompanied his mind. His conduct throughout this business proves it, and is above all praise. And when some accident, some fatal event happens, I always thought to myself, I should not be surprised if that were Eric. Even as though others say, "It's the ghost!" How often have I heard people utter the phrase with a smile? Poor devils. If they had known that the ghost existed in the flesh, I swear they would not have laughed. Though Eric denounced to me very solemnly that he had changed and that he had become the most virtuous of men since he was loved for himself, a sentence that at first perplexed me most terribly, I could not help shuddering when I thought of the monster. His horrible, unparalleled, and repulsive ugliness put him without the pale of humanity, and it often seemed to me that, for this reason, he had no longer believed that he had any duty toward the human race. The way in which he spoke of his love affairs only increased my alarm, for I foresaw the cause of flesh and more hideous tragedies in this event to which he alluded so boastfully. On the other hand, I soon discovered the curious moral traffic established between the monster and Christine Daae. Hiding in the lumber room next to the young prima donna's dressing room, I listened to the wonderful music displays that evidently flung Christine into marvelous ecstasy, but all the same, I would have never thought that Eric's voice, which was loud as thunder or soft as angel's voice, at will, could have made her forget his ugliness. I understood all when I learned